The AI Relay is a podcast where we're going to be talking about the topics around AI, how it's influencing our lives, how it's changing culture. John and I have been friends for about 30 years, having these types of conversations about different topics for a real long time. And recently, they've just been completely dominated by AI, and it just dawned on us that maybe this is something that we should record. And so this is our first podcast, and we thought it'd be a good idea to kind of dive into some primer topics. Some of this stuff gets somewhat technical, and we thought we should probably lay a little groundwork for some of the topics that we're going to be talking about, so people start understanding the lingo and everything else.
Yeah, that's a good overview. A little bit of backstory as well on my end is, Andrew's been working in tech for, well, almost as long as we've known each other. I come from very different domains, but I've always been curious enough to know that I wanted to know what was going on. So I've always, my entire life, stayed on top of the, let's say, news, the lingo, whatever, but never really dug deep. And now this AI revolution that we might be in has definitely taken over my mind, and I've decided to jump on the train of tech in a way that I never did before. So we're coming at it from sort of two different life perspectives, two different historical and experience perspectives. And so hopefully that little dynamic will give us an opportunity to tease out some of these ideas in a way that is not filled with tech lingo and difficult to understand concepts, or taking the difficult to understand concepts and making palatable.
Great. I think we should dive in.
All right.
Let's get started.
So, AI is everywhere. It's even got ads on the Super Bowl. But I think it's pretty fair to say that it's really just a word. People have yet to really grasp the full meaning of this technology, not just that it's a chatbot that can do something cool. So, you know, that's going to be an issue coming for everyone if they don't know what it is, but it's everywhere. So let's just start really simply. And what is AI? How would you tell, an average Joe or Josephine what is AI?
Well, what's interesting, right, is that like that definition of what AI is, and like in our common vernacular, it changed like 2.5 years ago. Before that, like even in the 90s, I remember there was a concept of artificial intelligence, but it was always sort of this kind of futuristic idea that like someday there will be computers that are as smart as people. And it's always and even being into computers in the 90s, it was sort of like, yeah, someday. And then that sort of evolved through the years, right? And the artificial intelligence took on like a different meaning, especially maybe like in the last 10 or 15 years, where AI really meant something different. Now it was machine learning, right? Machine learning is an
Machine
area
learning.
of machine learning, right? So before generative AI, like the area that like had shown the most promise for artificial intelligence was something called machine learning, and that was where you were like able to kind of train a model to like identify things like sentiment. Is this a rude comment? Is this a happy
Hmm.
comment? Or is this picture a picture of a dog or not a dog? And you can train it on a million pictures of a dog and a million pictures of things that aren't a dog. And then the machine learning would be able to distinguish one from the other, and it was pretty amazing. But model training was complicated and expensive. And this wasn't the promise of like even any sort of general intelligence. This was just something that would be able to distinguish something from something else. But that
So I think
sort of,
to make this
yeah,
accessible too for anyone who might be, because you actually slipped in a couple of words there that we're going to wind up getting into for sure, or phrases. But the machine learning, I think if I get it right, it's an example is what is it called? The CAPTCHA, when you have to sign into something.
perfect
Is that
example.
right? That's what the
Yeah, right.
machine
And if you
learning
remember,
level of AI is.
and CAPTCHA, that's been around for a while. That's been around a lot longer than something like ChatGPT. And and while it was like like a very significant advancement in AI, it didn't cause AI to have that sort of like iPhone moment where everybody decided
Mm.
that like I need to get one of these. And that's where we get to sort of this current sort of revolution that's generative AI. And generative AI really changed the public's perception of like what AI could be. And for the first time, AI was able to do more than just distinguish between a picture or not a picture, or like, you know, being able to establish sentiment of an email or something like that. Now it was able to like generate content, right? You could ask it a question and it would reply, and it would reply back with an answer that you were hoping or expecting. And that is like the key difference. And that is that shift that from machine learning to generative AI, that I think caused AI to have this iPhone moment where like everyone was paying attention now, because the implications of it were clear as day.
Right
You know,
away.
yeah,
Once it
you don't
started
need to like
talking
think
to
about
you,
how this
quote
could eventually
unquote.
evolve and replace somebody or do somebody's job, or you could see like it's already capable of, you know, doing some of that right now.
It's
And
funny because it in your timeline that you just gave too, it's almost like it it looped back around and actually, you know, became war games like, or you know, Terminator like, where it was engaging you all of a
right,
sudden.
yeah, I mean
So it's
that is the
like
big difference.
the dream that always seemed like, I wonder what AI is going to be like, and then there was these fictional, obviously doomy kind of, you know, the human likes to think of things going wrong, but all of a sudden here it is actually talking to you. So we have probably decades worth of research going back, I don't even know how long, maybe even the computer itself could be thought of as a form of artificial intelligence.
Right.
And that sort of plods along through some very difficult concepts and very limited technology, physical technology, to be able to make advancements. And then we're in the machine learning. The machine learning was actually pretty recent in general terms as well, though. I mean, we're not talking the 90s or even the early 2000s.
I mean, I wasn't paying that close attention to, you know, sort of, you know, to artificial intelligence at that point.
Right.
We did some machine learning. You know, like my area of kind of expertise in the IT world has always been in, you know, in well, at least the last decade in the cloud. So we were sort of tangentially related to the, you know, the machine learning, because, you know, the models and the tools that you use to do this sort of thing, typically you would do it in the cloud, because so a company's like capital outlay to do that sort of work is significant, right? So
And it would
companies
lean
tended
into
to use the
machine
cloud for that.
learning
Yeah,
to do, I don't know, heavier
the
loaded or
training,
bulky
right?
tasks.
You have a like you've got all this data. You need to train a model on the data, where you're going to give it reinforcement training, where you're going to say like, hey, this is a dog. These are like a million pictures of a
Here's a
dog.
million
Learn what a
dogs.
dog is. Learn the pattern. You know, map it, and then tag the things that, so you know, make this a dog. So that when you look at pictures that like may or may not be a dog, you're going to be able to identify based on that initial training.
So you actually just, I think, bridged the gap a little bit there, even in those words. You said training, you said model, and you said map it. So to go from machine learning, where if I understand you, you're doing a level of training which is just kind of like flashcards, and then somehow they adapt that technique to support what we now call LLMs, right? What's an LLM?
So those would be like large language models, and these are models, you know, where I guess the best way to simplify it is the operating system of a large language model is natural language, right? It's a model that is expecting to be prompted in natural language, and its output is in language. And that's what, you know, that's essentially the difference, you know, because when we're talking generative AI, that's really just the ability to generate something. But you know,
Anything, right? Any
anything,
output. So
generate any
in a
sort of output.
way,
A
the
language
machine
model
learning,
generates language, right? So
right?
now, that being said, we can get into, you know, it has evolved where they're becoming multimodal, you know, where it's, but
We'll get there. We'll
language
get there.
models generate language, and that's probably
So
just the easiest way to think of it for now, is that like that was the key differentiator, is this idea that we have language models now. They don't require structured data, they don't require some sort of like, you know, input file. It's just, you just use natural language. And what's wild now is, you know, working with AI, there are certain files that you common file types, like Markdown. Everything's .md. When you're working with everything, it seems to be in a Markdown file.
Mm-hmm.
Open up a Markdown file. What is it? It's just text.
It's just words. It's
just
just
language,
words in a
right? It's
particular way of
instruction in natural
organization.
language, which is really democratizing when dealing with like non-technical people, because natural language is the operating system of large language models. So nothing could be easier than instructing a model, because like if you can articulate it, you can instruct a model to do that thing, and that is like it's incredibly powerful.
It's essentially, language is our
Yes.
main input and output operating system, right? So it's not like we have to make some kind of leap here. It came so
Right.
close to us. The technology has come so close to us now. We just have to do exactly what we do well, and actually we'll get better outcomes. So in a way, the machine learning models were being trained, uh, and their outputs were just kind of simple. They couldn't talk, but they could verify, they could identify.
Well, so it wouldn't be able to necessarily talk, right? You could do clever things though. You could like pre-can responses and
Right.
say like, hey, if someone responds anything like this, like with a positive thing, you can respond with these responses, these pre-canned responses. So
That
there was like an element, right? But I think the technology behind it, and this is like outside of my scope of expertise, but like the actual like inner workings of the model and how it is intelligent, I think is dramatically different in machine learning than in like the neural nets of a large language model,
and
right?
there's
That's
another
like
there's another
just the
catchphrase
idea that
there.
like this model sort of works like the human brain in the
Right.
way it has this. It's just a network of all these decisions and model weights and all these things. But what's interesting about like that's something you hear about all the time. It's like the secret sauce of a model, how it's weighted and aligned. But what are weights? It sounds like it's super complicated. It's just a CSV file with a bunch of numbers. Like that's all. It's not, it's like just a bunch of numbers in a CSV file. It's nothing.
Well,
Uh,
let's touch on that because so we have going through time up to now we're at large language models, and we can maybe at another time get into the training, the difference between the kinds of training. But so we train these models. Is it like you train a dog to sit? I mean, what are you training it on? What does it mean to train a I don't know, a bunch of data? I mean, it's kind of like it's so inaccessible to our minds. Okay, it's a model. I can picture like a box or a server, let's say. Inside
right.
there, there's a whole bunch of calculations going on, and we're training this calculation, I guess, let's say. What is training?
I mean, training is learning, right? So training is where you're taking a model that has the capability to, take in information and like make logical connections between all these different pieces of information, right? So like when you're training models, right, you're really training it on like all known information that you can get a hold of, right?
Right. So it's not here's this set of photos of dogs.
Right. It's
And not
everything.
only that, it's like that keeps it in one lane. You're kind of telling it these are dogs, look, these are dogs. Here with an LLM, with LLMs, you're saying here's a vast array of
Broad.
information, all basically just bits of data. Take it in. And the amazing thing that an LLM can do is what you actually just mentioned. It can actually cross sort of reference and make
Yeah.
abstracted connections, which is very human. But so you don't have to even say necessarily why you're giving it a certain set of data or information. Just here it is. And it'll just kind of understand the way that information relates to itself within itself, the
Yeah.
information to the information. And then if you query it about something, as long as it was in that chunk of data, it's going to spit out actually like a full sentence by processing and cross-referencing all of the things that it has in its head, let's say. Am I
Yeah.
kind of hitting
Yeah. So I
the
mean,
dartboard
like
there?
you know, uh, models are trained on parameters, right? Or like bits of information. Uh, and that's sort of like how models are usually measured. Maybe not the foundation models, like they don't necessarily like publish that sort of information, but certainly like the open source models that, and we can get into the difference between these down the road, right? But like models are trained on like a certain, like just think of it as like how many pieces of information was this model trained on, and how much information does this model hold in its brain when it's there to answer my questions, right? So like you can have like a 300 billion parameter model. It's huge. It was trained on tons of data, as much as you could find. And then, but in order to run that model, you need to have just significant hardware, a huge capital outlay in order to train a model that big, hundreds of millions of dollars. And then to run it, like the inference side is like, after your training, right? And there's like a whole bunch of GPU that's required to train it, and those are tokens too, just like tokens is like the gasoline of the AI world, right? So when we talk about usage of a model, it's measured in tokens, and so you use tokens as that measurement. Yeah, but tokens, but it's like, so it requires a massive amount of compute to train a model. And then it also requires a massive amount of compute to run these large models. So, this is one of the reasons why compute, like large foundation models, the big players, they're big players. It's like they're
huge players.
Huge players. It's it's the Googles of the world. It's Microsoft. Right. It's Amazon.
Right. So it's trained on a bunch of data. And when we say data, it's words like that make many people just kind of
think of it like the internet.
I can't imagine what data
everything
is,
on the internet.
It's words. It's all the words.
Everything.
To start with, at least, just think it's all the words.
All the words.
It's trained on all the words that have ever been said on the internet.
It's to the point where they have trained models now on like the entirety of the internet, of like all the data that they can find.
Right.
And now they have to synthesize fake data to train the models even more, right? So these latest models, like not only have they trained them already on like the entirety of the internet, everything that we've know up to this point,
right?
But we got to make stuff up, so it gets better and more logical. And,
well, that's interesting. So speaking of make stuff up, so now this model gets trained. It's got all of this information, these words, these sentences, these books and encyclopedias and research papers and even fiction and whatever. It's now going to talk to me, though. It's going to generate, as you said, it's generative. It's a generative AI. So it takes in all these words and then can string out logical sentences. How does it do that? And why isn't it just talking gibberish?
Like the literal answer is very unsexy. And I think like if you take it literally, it's sort of like, it's not a complete enough answer to sort of talk about like how it and why it's so amazing. But the real answer is like, it's like a prediction model. And what it is doing is like every token, it's just trying to predict what would be the next word that it would expect you to want to for your answer, right? For its reply. What is the next word that would make the most sense in this reply? And
right. So it starts laying out a sentence. And if I've gotten it correctly, I'm trying to understand this stuff, but let's say you ask it a question and it comes up with the first most reasonable word or likely statistical word that would come up. It puts it there, and then it reviews the question and the word it put in, and then it predicts the next one after that, and then it reviews the question and the two words it has, and it creates this sort of like caterpillar or link chain through reviewing and then saying this must probably be the next word after all of the words that I just said myself. And then it reviews again and says, well, what would the next word after that be? And at the end of that process, you have a sentence that's actually structured grammatically, syntactically, which is just almost magic.
It is magic, right? But what's also interesting is like, you can pull back the curtain a little bit, and there are tools that allow you to adjust like the creativity and what they call the p-value and the temperature of the model, and like without getting too
Yeah.
into crazy concepts, right? But it's essentially
We'll
like,
get there, but this is the
right,
first episode.
but it really, like, what you're adjusting is like, hey, of of the possible words I could be choosing, how large should that basket be of possible
Yeah,
words? Like,
right.
you know, and that's like very creative, you'd be like huge basket. No creativity, it's like tiny basket. And
Mhm.
then there's a separate value that says like, all right, of all the words that you now have selected in this basket, what subset of these words are we going to use as our possible choices? And as a result of these like two sliders, you
Mhm.
can get to like your sort of like perfect match of like, this is exactly how creative
Right.
and truthful,
And
like
this
that
is
the mixture of
adjustable.
those two things.
This is an adjustable thing per task or project, right? If you're going to sit down and you want to start working on your memoirs, you might go adjust it a certain way. And if you're going to sit
Yeah,
down and you're going to write an essay for school, you might adjust. Well, maybe you shouldn't
this is a
use
sort
AI
of
to do it,
adjustment
but
that like if you're like building your own agent,
yeah,
you would
this is
have
getting a
total
little
control of. And different agents have different ways of, you know, if you go into like the old, I don't know, the open AI like dev studio,
mhm,
whatever they're calling it now, that gives you a lot more like, you know, buttons and ways to sort of play with and understand how models work. But now like you might go into like ChatGPT or Anthropic, Claude, and there might be a button that says like, you know, be more like this, be more literal, or be more
right.
conversational. And really all that's doing is it's in the background, you know, making
It's
a little adjustment,
controlling
and
those
then
faders there.
a little system
Right.
prompt that says, hey, you know, you're going to be super friendly every time you respond back.
Yeah, everything is going toward like the companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Perplexity and whatever. They're every time they realize there's like an extra thing that a human has to do, they're solving it by just making it so easy to just say it instead of having
Right.
to know where to go, what button to push, what to think. You could just now at this point say like, "Hey, we're working on an essay. Don't be too creative. We need to focus." And
Right.
that's essentially exactly adjusting those p values and whatnot. So
Yeah.
that actually is a lot of the reason why the earlier models uh were hitting the news with all these hallucinations, with what came to be called hallucinations, which are really getting tightened up and almost not even a topic of conversation anymore. But that has to do with kind of they were working with like such a big basket of words, like you were pointing out, and now they're getting, I think, more precise in understanding how to
And the
hone
models are just
in.
getting smarter, you know, so its
I think
ability to
that is what
choose.
is smarter, that is a
Well,
way
its
to
ability to
describe
like
being smarter.
right, and like to take the right path, that take the right neural path
Right, right,
and have that right basket of words, right? The better the model, the more correct the path. And so it's not that hallucinations aren't possible anymore. It's just that like as the models get smarter, it chooses a better path in that neural net that comes to like the better pool of words, the better conclusions, you know, the more correct conclusions, right? So
right.
it's not like they don't happen anymore, but one thing is for sure, right? That space moves so quickly that like hallucinations used to be something that was like so real that like you really should check like every answer, right? You
Everything.
know, like you just never know, right?
Mhm.
And it was common, and it's like if it gave you like a fake, you would just kind of brush it or like shrug your shoulders, be like, oh, look at that, it gave me a website that doesn't exist
That
and an
doesn't
article
exist.
that was never
Yeah,
written,
right.
as reference.
And to your point about how fast things are moving, I mean, we're talking in a way as though we're referring to some decades past. This was August. This was
Yeah,
September.
yeah,
And things were being blatantly hallucinated while I was trying to, vibe code some app or something.
right.
And what's been so advanced, like now the hallucinations aren't really the issue, but what we're starting to understand is almost like a fatigue. And that's the ultimate source of the hallucinations, are now turning into what we're calling session context. and context windows, right? And that is an important, like, not very deep layer to understand, but even if you're just using ChatGPT to check the weather or find the best restaurant, understanding what a context window is, I think, is like everybody should just get on board with that because it's pretty easy to understand and understand how it's affecting the output it's giving you. So this ties into the token usage you were talking about, but try to cover what is a context window. I can almost guarantee you that anyone who's listening to this who doesn't know about AI has almost never heard of that word at all. So why
Yeah.
is it important? What is it, and why is it important for your everyday user to at least have an overall grasp of a context window?
So I think like to best understand like the context window, it's like it's important to kind of break down that first word in context. What are we talking about when we're talking about context? And in like obviously people are familiar with the word, but in AI parlance, right? Context means like something very specific, right? When we're talking about context, like context is the thing that you provide a model in order for the model to provide you the best answer, like the answer that you're looking for, right? And the best way to, it's like if you wanted to say research informations about a breed of dog, right? You could go into ChatGPT, and poor context might be like do some research on dogs. It's
Right.
going to give you
Just a
research
straight
on
up
lots of
question.
different dogs, lots of different things, and it's like the answer is not really what I'm looking for, right? That
Yeah,
like
are you
that
talking about like like ancient dogs, the teeth of dogs, the biology
whatever,
of
you know what I'm
dogs, the
saying?
color of
And it's
dogs?
like you didn't provide the model enough context to give you the answer that you were looking for, right? So, so maybe you like dive into that conversation a little more. You're like, no, like I want to learn about King Charles Cavaliers. I want to understand like the history of their the heart murmur that exists within that breed. Again, so now you're like providing more and more context to the model in order for the model to really understand like what is that neural path I need to take to get the right answer for this person. And
Right.
in
So
order like
context
so like now you're giving it like more and more information, right?
mm,
And that model needs to store that information.
to
So
maintain context, to
to
know
keep on
to
that path,
maintain this
right?
conversation, right? Because
Totally.
you don't want to ask it, you don't want to, it's not like you give it a little bit of context, ask a question, and then it's over. You're
Right.
in the middle of a conversation, just like we
It
would be in everyday life. I'm not going to walk into a room and just kind of say a random thing. I'm going to
right.
want
Or
to give
think
you some
about
idea of what we're talking about.
how poor this conversation might be if we both lost our memory right after
Mhm.
the last sentence, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
So
Two amnesiacs can't really have a productive conversation.
that is the context window, right? So the context window is that the memory of like all of the context that you have provided the model in order for it to provide you the right answer. Now, right now, we're talking about context
But
in the sense of like
this is a function of time too. Sorry, right? Like it's not just the context that I gave it, but it's actually the what is
the
sometimes
response as
called the
well.
turns. It's sometimes called the turn, if
Right.
I'm not mistaken. So the my turn would be my input. The LLM's turn is its response, and that's one turn, two turn, three turn, four turn, and we create this chain, which is really what any conversation is. The
And
reason
it's
why we're still know what we're talking about right now after I don't know 10 or 20 minutes is because we have kind of context windows,
yes.
and actually even our own context windows can kind of get full. I think we were laughing a little bit last time we were chatting, like imagine being a parent trying to get dinner ready and the kids are all coming in from school, but you also have a newborn, and you're holding the
Right.
baby and you're trying to cook and the kids are running
Dinner's not
through
going
and
to come
maybe
out
the
as good.
dog's barking, and then all of a sudden, like something breaks, like there's water running out of the bathroom door for some reason, and your head explodes, right? We can all imagine what that feels like. You just can't focus. You feel like you can't even understand your own thoughts, and if someone asks you something, you might actually say something like kind of weird, like
Wrong.
blurry, not a straight up hallucination, but just a bad answer, right? You'd be like, blah, 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 and just not
I
really
think
make a lot of
it's a
sense.
great analogy, right? Because even for someone who like is cooking a dinner, they know how to cook that meal. They've cooked it 100 times. When clouded with all these other things, the output's not going to be great. And so context window is similar, right? As that memory fills up, right? That's like more and more things for this, for this model to kind of keep track of. It's going to start losing its way, like, because one, it doesn't have as much available memory to hold on to this stuff anymore, and it's holding on to all this stuff, right? So it's like, now I've got to think about this very long conversation we've had, as opposed to like in the beginning of the conversation, we haven't had that much conversation. It's real easy for me to just get back to like the last 4 turns, right? But when we're talking about 40 turns, so why, like, why do models sometimes perform better in the beginning of a session versus towards the end of the session? It's because, well, that context window is filling up.
Full.
And it's like, all right, I don't even have enough space. So like at some point it's going to be like, I gotta clear this out. I gotta like compact all this stuff, and it takes everything that's in its memory and it condenses it down and it distills it into this little ball. And then like, you'll be like, how is it? This was an amazing conversation like 20 minutes ago. It's devolved into, it's completely lost its way. And like, so this is the reason why context window is such an important concept, and that why like it is almost like the megapixel of the large language model, as a thing that it's like advertised that we have a 1 million token context window.
Right.
What that means is that like you're going to be able to put so much more information in this model's memory, and it won't lose its way. You can, 1 million tokens. That's like if you had a 700-page book in the prompt,
we'll probably get into more about what tokens are and what they represent, or what they actually are. But so, what just popped in my head too is the word, we're saying context window. We keep saying the word window, window, window. I'm actually sitting in front of a window. And if you're coming at this just cold, it might say like what you might be thinking of a window, like in your house, but it's more like when we use the word window, when we say a window of time.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Exactly.
Okay, so the context window is actually like a length of time. For me, I kind of have it flat. It's kind of going out there. And as you fill up that's
a much better way to explain it.
Then that is what's getting compressed. It's squeezed toward the end. And maybe another way to think of it, if one wants to, is like a bucket or a bathtub filling with water. And at some point it just can't hold anymore. And you have to drain the water out if you want to keep using that bathtub.
Yes.
So, and what it's filling with ultimately are tokens. And maybe we can hold off on like how those are generated and what they are and how important
for
they
now
are.
It's just like, think of a token as a word, but also like the gasoline.
You can imagine like a bathtub of Scrooge McDuck filled with coins. Okay. They're little tokens and they fill up. And the tokens are your conversation that turns back and forth. Which ties into like how you prompt. But really what I wanted to say for like the everyday user, I think it's important to understand this context window. If you're just kind of using it lightly, the way maybe we would have used search, Google search or something, you're never really gonna get to those limits of the session. They're not very long though. But if you're going to sit and, do some kind of work, whether it's research or you're going to help write a paper or you're just writing your memoirs, like I said, and you sit for an amount of time, more than 20 minutes, 40 minutes, then you're going to actually start experiencing this context window issue where, like you said, we dove into chapter 1 of my memoirs, and the first 20 minutes we were flying and everything sounded great and I'm loving it. And now like my coffee's done and it's pumping out like garbage. Why is it saying this garbage? But if you're not aware that it's just the context window issue, and this isn't a dead end, we're all finding out how to not even workarounds, but use it within our workflow. If you know your limitations, then you can come up with techniques and strategies of how to work within those limitations to get the best out of it.
Not only about its limitations of context, but like understanding that like context is what drives a better answer, right? So like if you wanted to write an article, you could just say, write me an article on this topic. And without any more context than that, it'll write an article. But if it's like, yo, I want you to write an article like in my voice,
Right.
here's some context for that request. Like, here are 10 articles I've written before. So as you're writing this, like, keep this in your context of like, here's my writing style. And like, so again, like the larger the context memory or window, the more information you could kind of feed it to help it get to that conclusion. And so like so rather than thinking of context as the chat that I'm putting into the model, think of all of it as context. The file that you've added as the example, that's context, right? There's something called MCPs, which I'm sure we'll dive into at some point. It's just like a bolt-on for a model. It just provides more context in a different fashion. So context is not just the chat. Context is everything, right? It's everything that you're feeding to the model to help it stay on that neural path to give you a better answer, like a better output.
The chat is limited by the context window. Not that it's going to end, but the quality of output is limited by the context window. But every piece of everything that you type in and everything it replies with is a constant feedback loop of context. So that actually has to fit within the context window as well. Like if you load up a PDF,
it's all context,
that's
right? Anything that you're providing to the model, whether it's in the form of a chat, in the form of a tool, like many tools, or knowledge bases or documents or like a video,
even just writing your likes, your opinions, how you're a little bit of some kind of connectivity issue. But we're back, and we were talking about prompting and how it was so important to know the technique of it, let's say, and it's kind of become irrelevant to understand that. However, the ground truth is the underlying communication is essentially prompting. However you want to know how to do it well or not, the way it works is prompting.
I'm always impressed when like I sort of dig into like the inner workings of like an agent or a tool to see how much natural language really is the operating system of large language models. Like whether it's like a skill that I've installed on Claude Code or whatever, like the underpinnings of it really is natural language. But I think like there was a lot of, I think in the early days of generative AI, and now we're talking like just a year and a half ago, right? So like when we talk, like about,
well, let's jump in right
honestly,
there.
though,
let's
in terms of in AI, like that's
let's jump in right there for the timeline wise. Sorry to cut you off there, but
sure.
This might be helpful to understand just how fast this is going, right? We were talking about like decades of research leading to machine learning really only about 15 years ago. And then the generative thing happens. Generative AI really was the open AI moment, right? That was the
ChatGPT moment.
Thing, right?
I think like that is now the term is
the ChatGPT moment,
like when it's like the watershed moment of that thing. Like,
and that was
November of
2022,
2022, maybe 2023.
You know, so I mean,
I don't remember.
Amazingly fast, right? Like the internet was around, right? Well, it was around for a long time, but like AOL, let's say, comes out really in the mid 90s. It takes like a decade before we have an Amazon, before we have a Google search, like, and it was clunky even after 10 years.
Yeah.
This was like 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Not even. It's like 3 years
ago. A lot of the things that we're really even talking about now, like we'd already mentioned, like this was August and it's completely different than it is today. So just to bring it up to today, like we have our ChatGPT moment, and now there's this explosion of incredibly intelligent models, and they're coming out. I mean, almost every week there seems to be some new advancement, or every day sometimes. And so the prompting that only 6 months ago there was the internet is full with prompt engineering courses and how to write the best system prompts and how to get the best outcomes out of your prompting. And it's almost irrelevant at this point to know the structure of that. It's almost like you needed to learn to code and then you kind of just didn't. It's like you needed to know how to prompt And now you kind of just don't. You just got to speak well, like an articulate human being. Is
And
that
there's so many more ways to provide context to a model in order for it to kind of stay on course and give you the right answer. So, in the beginning, when like the chat interface, that was for a lot of people, that's what it was. The AI was a chatbot, right? And especially when people had their first experiences with AI, the only input, right? The only way to provide context to the model was through prompting. So the
right?
idea that like being good at prompting was like important. It was a skill, it's like, all right,
It it
like,
it
how do I
came.
set the context of what I want the model to be? Like, so like in the early days, you'd always be like, all right, this is what I want you to be. I want you to be an expert in social media marketing. And I also want you to be an expert in this. And like, let me explain my problem to you. And then let's, help me come to a conclusion. Right. And it was
A
important
lot of
to
that,
understand how to like structure what
right?
the information you were giving to your, otherwise it didn't have the right context to be like, this is the hat I need to put on. This is the
And
expertise.
an interesting point there too, because you said the word structure. Like early on, the researchers trying to figure out what this thing can do, these large language models started realizing, and quickly it propagated through like the AI society of not only context but structured context, and they were getting better and better outcomes by actually outlining the context. So not just a paragraph, but breaking that paragraph into, like you just said, this is who you're going to be. This is my objective. These are your constraints. Here are some examples. And there was all these cool terms, right? One shot, zero shot, multi-turn, all these things were happening. I mean, it was a flash in the pan. People became experts and now they're already irrelevant. But the point that I'm trying to get at is now the models have gotten so good where you more and more can basically just write a paragraph and it will understand how to parse the structure that was 6 months ago. It just kind of can get it on its own now, as long as you're not just spitting out a word salad. If you
Uh,
have like some amount of organized thought and you can articulate it, the models now are so good where they can figure out who am I supposed to be in this conversation? What is the objective that this user is asking me about? Let me go out and find some examples of what this user is asking to model my response on. Where before it was very helpful to actually feed it some examples of this is the
oh,
kind of thing
totally.
I'm looking
Well,
for.
what's funny is that like, like again, like, for like for the first year and a half, something that was really popular that was, kind of out on the internet that a lot of
So we're
people
talking
took
20,
advantage of.
2023, right? This is not
2023, yeah, 2020. I think so.
2024
November
maybe.
22, I think, is when like ChatGPT hit, and
The
so
revelations of prompting came through research on the model, though. It's not like ChatGPT dropped an AI
there
and
weren't.
OpenAI gave you an instruction booklet saying this is how you should prompt. They
Well,
didn't
there
even
weren't like
know the
all
value of
these
prompting at the
like
time.
libraries of prompts that people were like, oh, these are really good prompts.
Right. You can copy
And like
paste.
that wasn't untrue necessarily, like, but there were also lots of them were like uncurated. So like, if I think it's good and I put it, like,
Well,
you might think it's crap, and
and the word context, it's context specific, really. So you might write a great prompt for whatever you were working on, and I could use it as a template, maybe, but I'd have to go in and make it my own to get the kind of outcomes that I want to get out of, because this is extremely atomized,
so
personalized interaction.
an interesting thing happened was that like people realized that the best prompt creator was the large language model, right? So like
Right.
instead of going to a library, you would just go to like ChatGPT and be like, build me the perfect prompt for this model,
Yeah.
right?
Or
I'm going
for
to go to
yourself,
Nano
even.
Banana, and
Mhm.
I want the best, so it's like, and and then it would create you like a great prompt, a
Yeah.
prompt that had all the context for that model to give you the output that you were looking for. So it's like, well, once you kind of figured that out, like, well, what good is an
A
uncurated,
prompt engineer, what we would call a prompt
prompt
engineer, even.
library, right? So it's just
Right.
the idea of like prompt engineering. It's like, well, once you understood that the model was the world's best prompt engineer,
That's right.
and the
The
model
best.
was capable of doing research on the latest models, was capable of doing research on like what are people in the last 30 days, like there's, you know, people have invented these skills that just go out and look at the last 30 days of like what people are doing
What's
on Nano
happening?
Banana, and then it builds your prompt around like what's working now. Because that's the other
Right.
thing, right? What worked well for like GPT-4 might be way overkill, way too like either way too much or way not enough, or like just
Yeah.
a
And
different style of prompting, right? That like isn't as effective in 5.2 as it was in, you
right.
know, whatever.
Because
So
there's a level of diminishing returns too. Even a year ago with the older models, you could over prompt and it would cause a different kind of drift because it's just got too much
you also fill up, you know,
context in
again, the
in a
context
funny
windows
way.
weren't huge back then, and like, you
Also
know,
true. Also true. Right. So I was going to say something else about prompting, but oh, I wanted to say like, yeah, even for an everyday user, it's I think an important concept to understand that like what people might say is meta, but it's you know the best entity to communicate clear and concise instructions to a model is a
right,
model. It knows how it thinks, so of course it would be the best tool to construct the prompt, even if it's back into itself. So you
yes,
said ChatGPT, I'm going to go to Nana Banana, but like if I'm working on a project, uh, I constantly say, "Cool." Like we'll be brainstorming back and forth,
right,
and it'll say like, "Great." Like write that up. It'll tell me write that up and do something with it. You know, go paste it over there. And I say, "Great, you write it." And
right,
it
yeah,
goes like, "Of
exactly, right,
course." It says, "Of course I should write it." And I'll even say, "You write it. You're the best, you know, person, quote unquote, to write this prompt to this model because you are that model." And it writes a fantastic model. And then it's humorous even because you'll feed it back in and it might not really have the context to understand what just happened. So it'll read it and be like, wow, this is a great prompt. You know, like it's written so well and concise. Like, yeah, of course it is. You
because you
wrote it.
wrote it, right,
I couldn't
or
organize it
you,
that way. And you
right,
know what? Even if I could organize it, here's just another everyday user kind of idea. Like, even if I could write it perfectly the way that a model could, it happens in less than 1.5 seconds. Like, why should I sit and write this thing out when I just say, you write it and it goes, boop, there it is, copy paste or download the MD or the PDF and I got it. Like the
so,
rapidity of
right.
it
So
is
it's like it's a
amazing.
concept where it's like I think that prompting is an important natural language is the important part to understand more so than like prompting, right? Because
Yes.
like everything is sort of a prompt, like when you sort of like look under the covers of like what makes like an agent an agent. It's really just another
It's just a
prompt in a
prompt.
different
It's a
place. You know, it's
it's a
like not a
it's a
user
static
prompt, it's a
file.
system prompt, but like
Right.
that, like when you set the context that like your agent is going to be an expert in customer service, and like I just want you to be a customer service agent, and like I don't want you to tell the person who your favorite New York Yankee is. Like I just want you to be able to like, you know, offer help on the product that we sell.
Yeah.
You know, you're really like just limiting the scope
That's right.
of that
And well,
agent.
that's what a prompt is, right? A prompt is basically a zooming in or a funneling, or it's not a
Totally.
bad limitation. It's saying just ignore all of that other stuff that has nothing to do with what we're trying to do here and focus on this. And
Right.
it's really helpful when you're building something, when you're creating something, when you're writing something, to constantly keep that in mind because you might start seeing it drift here and there, whatever, and you just have to manage it, right? You have to just manage the drift, correct the drift by prompting what you're saying. The underneath it all really is just prompting. So let me clarify a little bit about that, I think, because we've been talking about the chat interface and prompting, and it's really pretty easy to think, well, yeah, I write into the chat interface, that's my prompt. But you're right also that you could store these like a file, which is just in natural language. Like, let's say it's just a recipe for, you know, some meal.
Right.
If you store it and the model is either instructed or programmed, let's say, to read that before it responds to you, it's like a little memory file, but that's a prompt, just a static prompt sitting in the background. So the prompt isn't only the chat interface input. A prompt is
Well,
just
all right. So
everything.
this is where semantics get in the way. It is context. It is not a prompt, because a prompt is this, right? A prompt is actually like I am prompting, like from a literal a literal
Okay, if
perspective,
you want, yeah,
like
the literal
prompt.
word prompt is I'm
So
currently
like,
prompting
but
you
it's
to do
like you
something.
are right. A prompt would be something that I'm like telling the model to do. Whereas like there's a difference between a prompt and an instruction, right? Like and like I
Well,
guess a
yes.
prompt can't be an
However,
instruction.
like, because if we're going to, as you said, like there is parlance where the instructions sit on what is called a system prompt. And the system prompt is not
A
a
system
real
prompt
time, it's not a
is a
real
different
time
from a user
poking.
prompt. It is a
Correct.
prompt. It is a
That's what
prompt,
I'm trying
right?
to
But
get
I
at.
think in most people's like in most people's minds, they're thinking of a prompt that's something that they're providing rather
That's
than
correct.
something
And I
that
think that's
is like
the
sitting in front of a model that is like limiting the scope of its expertise. So it's going to spit out an answer better aligned to like what you
I
need
I
it to
think
do.
the word prompt is still appropriate though, because like
It probably
if
is. Like,
if let's put it in real world terms, we're standing in a kitchen and you've got a cookbook there, and I say, hey, can you make me, I don't know, chicken marsala or something, or I don't even know if that's a real plate, but you have the context, as you said. And my words are kind of like mine typing into the chat interface. You open the book to this static recipe, which we could call the system prompt for you as the chef. How are you going to cook, and what are you going to cook? So you refer to you are prompting in a way your brain in that moment with that information. It's not a real-time prompt like I'm poking you with words, but then your brain is then it is prompted to be like, oh yeah, I need chicken and I need whatever,
yeah. And
tomato
honestly,
sauce and all that stuff.
I think we might be getting a little in the weeds in like
Yeah.
the underwork, like kind of like we're not talking about the car. Now we're talking about the fuel injection.
Yes, this is true. Let's
And
not
it's
linger
like,
on it too long. Let's not linger on it too long. I just
but you
wanted
know,
to
at the end of
point.
the day, like I think if you take away anything from this conversation, is that like one very basic concept is that like natural language is like the operating system of a large language model. And it's like it understands language the way that a computer understands the
Binary
C
code.
programming language, right?
Correct.
Like
Right.
where you'd have to add all these syntax and all, like, you know, and it's perfectly
Right.
structured. You don't need perfect now. Again, like most computers, like it's going to do better with structured data than unstructured data, but unstructured data it can do
Right.
just fine if if you provide it enough context and don't try to purposely confuse it. Um, I think that's one of the
Yeah. I
I think
think
one of the most democratizing features of AI is that its operating system is natural language. So like it's really
so.
easy
To wrap
to.
it up in a practical way, to wrap this up a little bit for in a practical everyday man on the street kind of way, that to bring those two together, you're chatting with it, and what you're effectively doing is prompting it. And the better the prompt means the better the context, the richer the context.
Yes,
So even if you're
richer the
gonna be
context.
an everyday user, and you're not going to sit for 30 minutes and really, or an hour, and push the context window to its limits, but you use it every day to maybe help you organize your day, or right, whatever. um Understanding, just grasp that what you're doing is inputting context, and you're prompting this machine to give you a string of predictable answers
Right.
based on the context that you have input, which is
And
your prompt.
that's an interesting point too, because not all context is pertinent to getting the right answer. And
Right.
like most context isn't, right? So it's like if you like all the time I'll hear people say like tell the model everything about you. Well, like that's a great idea. If you want the model to be like a personal assistant for you,
Yeah,
then tell it everything
it
about you.
has its use. It
But
has
if
its
you
use.
wanted to create if you wanted a model that's like a cooking model, it
Right.
doesn't need to know everything about you. It
No,
just needs to know about like what
it
kind of
might
food you like,
even
what food you don't like, right? It doesn't need to know.
right.
Maybe it needs to know that you have kids because you might want to cook something for your kids, but like it doesn't need to know
Doesn't need to know
what
your
your type of
hobbies. It
car
doesn't need to
is,
know
or if you
where
like
you
the
went to
Yankees,
vacation.
or like that's
Doesn't need
context
to.
it doesn't need, right? It might
It
need to
will
know your favorite
affect.
cookbooks, like
It will affect the way it answers your what am I having for dinner tonight? But it might just be superfluous and get in the way as well. So it really is all about what is the task at hand, the project at hand, what are you trying to do in
Right.
that moment to curate and mold the kind of context you want to give it. We can get
And
into
really
like
just
some of
kind
these
of
other um,
keep it on that neural
and
path.
direct it, right? And
Right. Keep it on that right
one way
neural path
to
so
talk
that
about
it's gonna
that
continue giving
in
you
the
the answer that you want.
right. And one way to demonstrate that, which we won't get into here though, is the concept of something like tasks in ChatGPT or projects in Claude, which are extremely useful because they're sort of fenced in contexts that you can have as many as you want. And you could say, this is my chef, and this is my gardener, and this is
Yes.
my mechanic, and the one doesn't confuse the other. But nonetheless, let's maybe try to wrap this up. It's probably been going on for a while. So one major takeaway that I think we could maybe close on, but I want to say to the average user out there is everything we just said about context prompting and the way it predicts and all this stuff, we were describing it. But when I take a step back, I just hear be an articulate, well organized, thoughtful person and communicate like a human. We've always had to know how to do this. Like for millennia, the people in society who could organize their thoughts and communicate it in a structured, clear way to others generally are more productive members of society, to say the least, if not the leaders of society.
Well,
So
they'll certainly be better
we've
at
kind
using
of closed
AI.
the
Like,
circle, and well, that's what's amazing. Like this is closing a circle in my mind where it's almost hilarious that we're wondering all about this technology and what it's going to do to us, and at the same time we're worried about how these kids these days, they're just doom scrolling and they don't have any creative thoughts, and there's no more critical thinking out there. And this brand new technology that is going to absolutely change everything, it's not, it doesn't need a new, realm of understanding. It
right.
just be a good human, be a good communicator,
Be a good
and you'll be a
communicator.
really good AI tech.
Yeah. I 100%. I mean, well, I think that is like one of the things that makes it as approachable as it is, and something that like just about anybody can sort of get your hands dirty and start using immediately. You've got
Right.
it on your phone, download the app. These are, they're free to use, to play with. You want to use them more, you might need to pay, but this isn't like the early days of computers where you needed to be like a Poindexter with,
Right.
glass, your
In a
broken
big,
glasses or
book of library commands.
and it was,
So
it was hard. And this isn't hard. So don't be intimidated.
that's
Get
right.
your hands dirty and
It's not
start
hard.
using these tools.
It's not hard because it's exactly the way you are already. You're a person, you have thoughts, you communicate them. And that is different than Google Chat. Sorry, Google search. Like there were techniques with Google search to get the best search results. This is not that. And that may be the most practical part of why I think we want to do this podcast, is to try to open up the actual simplicity in a way of this to the general public who throughout all of our lives we're constantly intimidated by new technology, and as people get older they're even more and more intimidated. And this is, in a strange way, one of the least intimidating if you actually start to understand how it functions.
For
So
sure.
this isn't a podcast for the people who already know what we're talking about or what you're talking about. I'm still kind of on my journey here. This is a podcast for people like me who started, I started less than a year ago, honestly, even less than that. And I'm just going as fast as I can. But the breakthrough was that it's just so accessible because you just have to talk and talk
It's
well.
right. This isn't a technology for computer people.
Right.
This is a technology for everyone. It's a democratizing technology that will enable people to do things that they were never able to do before. Whether that's
That's right.
like build that little app that you had always thought about, or plan that trip that was always too daunting, or um,
Exactly. Without even
it's
you're not even going to write apps. That's fine. But what you just said, you're going to plan a vacation. It's not just a Google search. This podcast hopefully will get people to go a little bit deeper in their interaction with it, even if they don't become an AI tech of some kind. But you're going to get better outcomes of your everyday use of just chatting with these things by listening to this podcast. That's the goal, I think, or one of the the goals of this podcast. So why don't we wrap it up? You want to?
I think that's a good point. I
Wrap up?
think that's a
I
great
think
way
that's where
to
we can
kind
wrap it
of.
up. Yeah, I guess like,
All right.
subscribe, and
Until
share.
next time. Yeah. Until next
Whatever they
time,
say.
folks. Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Yeah, this has been the AI Relay with Jonathan Spanos and
Andrew Signore.
Andrew Signore, and we'll see you
Signing
on the
out.
next one.
Later.